Hello, wherever you are in the world today. Welcome to Beyond the Art and our series, The Stories That Carry Us. I'm your host, Cray Bauxmont-Flynn, a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and the Delaware Tribe of Indians. In each episode, we will discuss with various Native American artists, influencers, art leaders, and everyone in between their experiences, the communities they serve, and the translation and interpretation of the Native American art world today. Hi, America. How are you today?
Hi, doing good. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Welcome to Beyond the Art. So I know a little bit about you, but for our listeners, I know you're the editor and publisher, writer of the first American art publication. Tell us a little bit about that publication and what is its core essence to be distributed out to its readerships.
Sure. It's First American Art Magazine, and we're quarterly. We're in print, but we also have a digital component. And my training is all as an artist. I have 3 degrees, and they're all in painting. So we were started by Native artists because we need an honest voice, and we need fact checking, and we need something that's very expansive and not limited. So something that accurately reflects what's going on. So we're open to any media, and we've opened more and more to literary arts, singing, music, film. There's so much going on in theater. So expanding that notion of what is art. But we are based originally in Santa Fe, now in Norman, Oklahoma. But like I said, our literary editors up in London, Ontario, and we do have writers in France. We have writers in England. One writer from Mexico, but I'm always looking for Latin American coverage. And that is our scope, is the Americas, so North and South America, indigenous people. But Native people show and exhibit all over the world. So we do try to reflect that. We've covered Native artists going and traveling and showing in China. I think it's really important. And this has been going on for a long time. So we're just actually, kind of reflecting how cosmopolitan Native artists are.
So when did you start the publication, and what's the transition that you've seen from the state art to today? What's the continuation of the theme that's being projected outward about the Native American art scene, but also how you've seen the change and transition from when you started to today, and some of the artists and what's really important to them in the story that's continuation of what they're trying to say about their artwork?
Yeah, so we're about to hit our 10th anniversary issue. So that'll be April.
Fantastic. Congrats.
Yeah, our publication is kind of incredible. A lot of tenacity. But so there's always, I grew up in the Native art world in Oklahoma, like in Muskogee and Norman. So there's always kind of this view, kind of a little cynical, that every generation, every 25 years, Native art gets cool. And I definitely saw that in 1992. Like we were it, We
were the it thing at that point, yeah.
Yeah, it fades, but it's really amazing. And I would mark 2005, Gaylord Torrance's exhibition, Plains Indians, People, Earth, and Sky. When that hit, that was showed in Quai Branly, Musée de Quai Branly in Paris, and then showed at his institution, Nelson Atkins, in the Met. And there was kind of this feeling that was a groundswell of interest in Native art, and that's just exploded since. And it really hasn't lit up. So this is very sustained. And when we first started, I kind of did feel that contemporary Native art was the art that no one wanted at the time. Really kind of felt like that because I know as a painter, I do a lot of portraiture. I paint people as they are, in the clothes they wear. I don't, so they might have short hair instead of beautiful long hair, and they're not riding a horse. They're riding a bicycle or a motorcycle. Right. So I knew if you buy into the existing tropes and stereotypes and people's expectations, you sell. You can be very commercially successful. But no. So like I want to reflect how awesome and amazing Native people truly are, instead of, reifying outsiders' misinformed expectations. And now the art world really seems like they've come around. It's kind of extraordinary. And I think there's a lot of reasons. I think Native artists have always occupied this weird permission to tell the truth in the artwork.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes on truth that's obvious. I've used the example, water is life. Like, that's pretty damn obvious. But Native artists, we don't have to be layers upon layers of complexity and irony. We can just
be true to ourselves and where we come from.
And now I think there's really a hunger for that. And of course, there's diversity. And that's the thing is like, we use words like Native American or Indigenous, but there's 600 different First Nations in Canada. And then how many Inuit communities? And then how many Inuit communities are in Greenland? Like you go down country to country, there's hundreds upon thousands of diverse communities, and we're all diverse. We're not the same. So we all have our own languages, our own religions, and we kind of fight tenaciously to hold on to those. So when it comes to diversity, we are uber diverse. And I'm glad that there's a reckoning in our world. A lot of it is led by Black Lives Matter, but this realization that you need a multiplicity of viewpoints. And now there was all this funding that I watch happening where people are like, oh, we need to diversify leadership in museums. And, they threw money at it and created fellowships. And now there's an understanding within the museum world that there has to be a really seismic change. And it has to be like at the leadership board level. The boards have to be diversified because if they're not diversified, nothing else will be. So, lots of changes.
Lots of changes throughout the last 10 years. I mean, that's impressive. Yeah. 10 years in publication. You've made it through the hump, as they say.
So built and it might be our doing, and I think a lot of it is just the nature of the internet and the nature of the art world that now we can communicate. Small, rural communities, geographically remote communities can be connected. And I think that cannot be overstated enough. I would like to take all the credit, but I can't. But anyway.
You can, go ahead. As a creative editor and also a writer, what is your curatorial practice that you've instituted when you started the magazine and to today? Is it that type of artist? Is it the diversification, as you said, is the transformation and interpretation of the outside world looking at Native American art itself?
So there were a lot of, we did research and we did questionnaires of what people wanted, what they didn't want. And I think it's kind of hilarious what people didn't want, but they were like, we did have kind of this mantra of like, not the same 6 artists. And I realized that's not just a Native art world problem, that's an art world problem where someone gets famous, so everyone jumps on board. Like everyone needs that one. And it's like, the go-to artist. But as artists on the ground, we get to see, I think the art world is very altruistic, but I think the Native art world is very, very altruistic, where we see these wonderful, talented artists coming up and also elders that haven't been written about sufficiently. And we want to lift them up. I think we all have this shared responsibility to lift each other up. So we really want to expose. I love writing about, we cover a little bit of emerging artists, but for the most part, when it comes to profiles, we want someone with a fairly well-established over of art, that we can talk about, but when they're at a level where they're just about to explode, where the art is mature and they found their voice and they're about to go huge. I love being able to portray someone at that mode. But I think what's important about the magazine is I let the writers come. I want the writers to be passionate about what they're writing about. So they come to me with what they want to write about. And I always think it's like, how do I learn so much about Native art? I read the magazine. And some we will assign. Like some stories are big and we need someone to cover up. Like the Field Museum and the Idle-Jorg Museum, both renovating their permanent halls. And have you been to the Field Museum before?
I have not. It's on my list.
Okay, it looks Victorian. They're used the dead taxidermied birds, which I know some people love them, but their halls were Victorian. So the fact that here's this natural history museum completely revamping themselves, and the expectation now is in the art world that you need Native voices, but you need many Native voices, and this plurality is so important. And I think that's something that is, kind of rippling throughout the art world, that you need this plurality of voices. So that's definitely reflected in our editorial content.
Do you think there's a story to be told from the Native American artists from when you started 10 years ago? It was more landscapes and part of our culture or heritage, but is there a political point to make a point to say, here we are, here's our view. We've gone through this for the past, since first contact. This is what we feel is important to us now. Yes, we understand our cultural heritage and some of the important factors of our Native American heart as various tribes. But is there a point of view in today's society that we need to take a stance and say something, and this is our point of view? And do you see that's being replicated a lot from the young artists that are up and coming?
Well, I think there's always meaning in the art. And I think, again, there's a plurality of views. So we as a magazine, we need to reflect the reality on the ground, where some people may be really interested in technique and aesthetics, and they absolutely have that right as a Native artist. And then some people are very, kind of very overtly political and very engaged with a European American or Euro Canadian audience. And you don't have to have one audience. Like I'm really grateful that we've been able to write about artists that aren't, Native artists that aren't really participating in the gallery scene or the museum scene, and they really make work for their own community. So the whole spectrum is incredibly important. But there's never been one viewpoint. There never will be one viewpoint. So our pilot issue that is online for free, we really just wanted to blow all people's expectations out of the water. So my friend Roy Boney, who's, I can't believe how successful he is. I'm like, oh my God, I know Roy Boney. But he wrote about this multi-Native artist participation in a mainstream art show in Paris. And I think that's really important that Native artists do dovetail into the larger art world. And then I wrote about the contemporary art scene in among Greenlandic Inuit artists, because I think people, forget that Greenland's part of North America. So we really just want to take people's expectations and just blow them out of the water. And I was really grateful. Like Sarah Sense wrote about a Mapuche textile artist. And I think there's a constant, kind of push-pull argument about, okay, so who's the revolutionary? Who has the political content? Who is really making a point? And I'm hoping to get mainstream readers to understand that you can have a ceramic pot, a ceramic vessel, and it's utilitarian art, and that is loaded with content. And for a Native person to harvest their own clay and pit fire a pot is making a massive political statement about connection to the land, about the forces that are working on the earth, about using your hands. There's so many layers of meaning behind it. So it's kind of wooing the audience, like, okay, this is an object that it's not like, this politician sucks. Like, we get that. That's really obvious. Right. How do we get to the next level? Like, I'm wearing a shell engraving by Antonio Grant, Eastern Band Cherokee. So what is he saying by making a shell engraving today and carrying these designs forward into today's world? And he's saying they're immortal. The these are representing immortals, but the designs and the meanings are immortal too.
So the artwork is more than just artwork. There's a story behind it. There's a connection. There's a connection to the person. There's a connection to the tribe. It's a connection to that person's heritage. It's part of their DNA, so to speak. We discussed how we're on the upswing now. We're the it factor. Yeah. Why do you think that? It's always good to be the it factor, but why is it so prevalent now? Why the moment now? And do you think it's going to last for beyond 2 or 3 years? Will we fade away again, and then another 10 years we might come like, ooh, look, Southwest art or something, just something that gets that kind of kitschy feel that people's like, oh, gotta have it. But do you think now we're here to stay and we're a force to be reckoned with the Native American art and the cultural scene, especially being in various galleries nationally?
I think there's certain artists that always want to engage with the art world on their terms, and they're making a sacrifice that I applaud them representing. And then there's so many Native artists who don't care what outsiders think, and they're just going to do what's important to them and then what's important to their community. I definitely think the mainstream art world is fickle, and I think, there'll be another arc, and it might be 10 years from now, 20 years from now. I'm not worried about it because we do what we do because it's important and necessary.
Right. Do you think some artists are playing to their audience instead of actually, I don't want to say be truthful to themselves, but is it more about getting their name out there and selling the artwork, or is it about playing to the audience and saying, okay, I'm going to give you what you expect? or I'm
And
actually
that's,
going to give you what you don't expect and what's coming
yeah.
from my soul and my energy and my DNA.
Yeah, and that's kind of that the intrinsic motivation, like is it coming from within yourself or is it extrinsic? Is it coming from without? And don't you think most artists are kind of operating on a continuum of,
Mm-hmm.
the audience and themselves? And I
It's
always,
growth. It's growth
I,
within themselves and the growth within the market, I believe. Yeah.
yeah, but and I think if you can always find your own market, like the art world's so huge that if you put yourself out there and you keep maneuvering, you'll find the right people, you'll find the right audience for yourself, I think.
Mm-hmm. Do you think some of the artists out there are kind of looking at history and creating art forms that are a decolonization of where we started and where we came from and our transition in today's society?
Yeah, well, I definitely take the feminist viewpoint that the personal is political, but Native artists get to do whatever they want. So if if there's an artist who's like, I purely want to do something based on aesthetics and I only want to explore color, that's their right. But I do think it's a worldwide movement since postmodernism, where the history, because I think modernism was a global movement and it otherized, instead of otherizing, a certain geographical area, it otherized the past. But, for us, our past has been ripped from us. Our histories have been ripped from us. And that's so many communities around the entire world. So postmodernism, I think, is using the past as a resource, in all its fragmented ways that we get it. So and Matthew Ryan Smith, one of our brilliant writers and our literary editor, he wrote about archival art, which Hal Foster, the art critic in New York, he defined that. It's one of the few that argues that we still have discrete art movements today, because a lot of people like Arthur C. Danto argues that art movements are over. We don't have art movements. But Hal Foster described archival art. And I'm like, oh my God, that's what so many people are doing. And Shane Gosthorne is the best example I can think of that. Eastern Band Cherokee, and we lost Shan, I believe in 2018. But she was literally going to the archive and copying these documents and weaving these documents into baskets. So I can't think of a more literal use of the archive and transforming it into today's art.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really follow the very esoteric arguments about what is original and what is creating something new. It's probably, people argue there's nothing that's original, and that's probably a completely valid
right. We didn't have the media. We didn't have the social media. We didn't have cameras. We understand and we try to interpret to today's what it means to us and growing as a culture. What really grabs you being a writer and the editor of the magazine is like, oh, we have to cover this. We have to cover this. What really is gravitating you into really, I don't want to say exploiting, but it's just,
I don't want to explain.
Just burns your passion. It's like,
yeah, I love seeing small communities working together and creating something they love. Like when you see a tribe be able to institute a new cultural center, or when artists get together and self-organize and they curate their own shows, that we have to be the change we want to see. Right. So it's so exciting, and I didn't realize how many gaps there are. Like one of our writers in the first issue, Niven Southall, their passion is Native graphic arts. And before talking to Niven, I had no idea that there isn't an organization for Native American graphic artists. And I just assumed there was, because you think every tribal paper, who's laying out the paper, all the tribal seals, the tribal flags, who's designing those? So you have thousands of people that are kind of unsung heroes. So Niven was just involved with other graphic artists to present the first Native American typography. And I'm saying Native American, I should be more careful with my words. But first typography conference or symposia online for Indigenous peoples of the Americas. So the fact that they saw this gap and were able to fulfill this gap, that's awesome. And then you think, now that door's been opened, like all these other people will be able to coalesce around this idea and, work together.
Correct. I mean, one of the other items that, besides that, the graphic I've seen lately in the last probably couple of years is Native American comic art being a resurgence and really making a statement, and people kind of exploring that and actually extending it even further, which really grabs me because it's a story that hasn't been told. It's an art form that hasn't been told, and it's new. It's to our generation, our today's society, and seeing how that's kind of just morphing into something very unique, and it's exciting.
Yeah, and it's really exciting too, like Malia Denali, that Native kids can turn on TV and there's a reflection of a reality they can relate to. And I think it's also important that like Malia Denali or, okay, totally different, but the movie Prey, which action movies are not my thing, but I watched Prey with no expectations and I was like, this is brilliant. But the fact that it's getting this widespread audience, and I think that goes back to the personal is political. But, you know, kind of the more unique story you tell about yourself, ironically, the more people can plug in and relate to it. And Sterling Harjo and Taika Waititi's Reservation Dogs, like, completely is blowing up. But all these different communities, people that aren't even Native American, just can relate to those stories. They're so beautifully well told. So I don't think there's anything universal, you know, that's the modernist viewpoint. But there are things that, you know, different communities that feel underrepresented can definitely relate to. That's exciting.
It's very exciting. And I'm hopeful, personally, that since comic art, Native American comic art is on the surge, so to speak, that this helps kind of guide and infiltrate to the youth of something that they're not getting either from home, from their community, or even educational purposes, that this is kind of driving their force in the back of their minds, like, oh, this is very cool. I'm connecting to this, and I'm going to learn more about my heritage and the artistic value of what my heritage brings to the table. Since art is not part of the curriculum right now in a lot of schools nationally.
Yeah, locally.
Do you think that's a problem, though, that we don't have that, and art in the essence is the classics, the Renaissance, all European driven in our art schools, and Native American youth are not learning about it, and it's kind of like brushed aside?
Oh, I'm just worried about people not getting any art classes whatsoever.
Right. True.
Like, yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. Yeah, there's trouble with our educational system here in Oklahoma. But that is kind of the beauty of the era we're in. If you are curious enough to ask the question, your smartphone or your laptop at your school library has this window into this incredible world. Like, I was on OCO TV and I'm like, whatever, OCO TV. And then my boyfriend at the time started watching it and I was like, these are incredible. Like, this is actually good information, solid, accurate, good, interesting information about Cherokees. And I'm like, I've never heard of that being in the public realm. So it's like, that's free. Like, any kid can punch in OCO TV and then there's all these stories unfolding.
Exactly.
So I think it's just having that curiosity to look. And yeah, I do think you kind of do need that. You need to ask the question. You need to be like, well, I need to learn about art from my community, or maybe I live in this area. Maybe I live in Iowa. So who are the tribes in Iowa? Do I want to learn about that? And I do think that's a greater problem, at least here, but I think worldwide, a sense of displacement and disconnection to the land we live on. So I think there is a strong craving, and that dovetails with the urban gardening movement, which I totally support. But you know, like whose land am I on?
Right.
You know, so that leads people to be curious, like, who are the tribes who lived here? Who are the tribes here today? You know, because most cities have a major urban Native community. And that's something else good is, representation. What you're talking about, representation is amazing. And Tommy Orange, you know, Cheyenne, that he was able to write There, which is about Oakland. So it's like, okay, this is an urban Indian novel. And having that story told is so important.
Right. No, I completely agree. And that connection value, you know, when I was growing up, I had something that was connected. It was my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, which I was lucky enough to meet. And knowing those stories that were being told, generational, you know, and I think that is being lost because, you know, we're kind of just blending in where you got to take a stance and you got to know where you came from and who came before you and so on and so forth. So telling those stories, and now everything is online. When I was growing up with encyclopedias, that you have that, I think it comes more from the heart when you hear it from an elder. And if not, elders are not sharing it anymore, it's kind of getting lost.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. Like in the 70s, that was definitely a time of pan-Indianism. And you had these generations that grew up in cities
Hmm.
because of relocation and just economics too, that they didn't really have a tight connection to their own tribes. And then that arc kind of shifted. And I know that there was the 80s and 90s were more of a craving to finding out your specific tribe. So I do think there is a lot of kind of
Yeah.
pan-Indianism happening work there as well.
Is that a
But
coined word?
no, it's an old word. It's from
It's
the
right.
70s. But yeah. But I think there's always that arc, and I think there's this hunger. And you mentioned classics being taken out of school, and that kind of all shifts really quickly. We
Hmm.
did cover this. Laura Marshall Clark talked about this, but there's the Clemente courses in humanities. The Earl Shores, he's passed on. He's a Jewish American writer from New York, and he went and studied poverty throughout the United States, and he found communities that could get their way out of poverty on their own volition. Obviously, no one does anything by themselves, but through their
Hmm.
own initiative, were communities that used politics with a small p, in that the people could negotiate power amongst themselves. And he saw Black churches as being a really strong vehicle for this. And by as he studied, he was like, humanities are the vehicle that allows us to be able to negotiate power through politics. So that's philosophy, theology, art history, all these things that we've kind of been taught here in Oklahoma. That's fluff. That's for rich people. That's extra.
Right. Right.
It's not intrinsic. So Earl Shores developed out of Bard College that does amazing things. Instead of it, because he's like, poor people get training programs, wealthy people get humanities. So he created a humanities course that wasn't easy. It was absolutely demanding. And he recruited the top teachers he could. And he, for the students, it was homeless teenagers from the Bronx. So
Mm.
people that hadn't been to college, and it was wildly successful, completely wildly successful, because this reflection, being able to think through things, being able to verbalize through things, and, music and art, these are all different ways to see things from other people's perspectives.
Right.
And from that, he went down to Kicha minor communities. And there, they have a written language. So he was able to use their literature and create the first indigenous Clemente course in the humanities. So my father and he worked together, and all these three classes in Oklahoma are still continuing. They developed a Chickasaw humanities course, a Kiowa humanities course, and I think the Cherokee humanities course is on break, but hopefully it'll come back soon.
Is
But
this through the local university system?
different universities,
Mhm.
yeah. And the tribes supporting, of
Mhm.
course. But the Kiowa humanities course is almost completely independent, but they're still going. But it's so important that the language, because as my dad put it, the wisdom is encoded in the language, the
Mhm.
philosophy, the worldview, our science, it's all included in the language. And a lot of tribal museums are actually using native languages to inform how they work with their native collections,
Right.
because the language and the materials, they're dovetail, and you actually learn the language better when you're out in the environment working with, what was being discussed. So basket weaving, for instance, is really important for language retention. But where I was going with all this is, my father would never promote intertribal humanities course. They always had to be tribally specific. So you really think about it. On one hand, like with the magazine, we have this massive umbrella, art by indigenous peoples of the Americas. But individually, each culture, each language is absolutely discrete, and their expression, that's where the value is
Mhm.
this unique expression. So making space, I think that's very hard for outsiders to do, but make space for each individual expression of culture, of what it is to be human. You
Right.
think
Right.
all these native cultures are experiments in what is possible and ways to be human. So our entire world is so much richer when all these cultures are allowed to live and breathe. And the arts are definitely a link in how to reclaim those.
Right. And do you think it's a part of the artist's responsibility to carry that in their work?
Yeah, and I mean, again, I'm always going to fight for this. Artists get to do what they want. If I'm a native person and I am a graffiti artist and all I want to do is tag, I get to do that. So I think Native artists get as many choices as any artist.
Right,
on the
right.
website. Yeah. And there's interesting movements right now in, technology, because I think outsiders sometimes see Native people as not being technologically advanced. And you're also Cherokee, so you totally understand that Cherokees were very early adopters of technology.
Correct,
The first college for women. West Mississippi was Cherokee Female Seminary. First telephone installed, brand new technology, Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Yeah. So we understand that technology and indigeneity are not mutually exclusive. So we really need to convey that to the rest of the planet. So I see, I follow Damien Jim online, and he's this interesting Navajo artist, and also Dante Biss. He's an Osage artist, and they're both experimenting with AI assisted
really
creation. Yeah.
What are they exactly doing with that?
Creating visual images, digital art. So they both already were doing digital art, but now through AI, you can kind of accelerate that process. So some people see it, maybe it's a threat, or maybe it's creating schlock, but it's a tool. So you can harness this tool like any other tool.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's more of an exploration and openness to museums and galleries and other venues bringing in Native American art, that it's not just a
tokenism?
Tokenist, thank you.
Yeah.
I hate that word.
Really? I think it's a good word. Spells out what's happening.
Right.
But I'm glad that, and I always think whenever we talk about museums, we always have to include tribal museums. Like
correct,
the Cherokee Center, awesome museum. Osage Museum, awesome. So, yes, but I do think it's good that Western mainstream museums have this great peer pressure going on that, they need contemporary Native art in their collections. They need to be showcasing these hot Native artists. It's like,
I think it's also the diversification of some of those museums and centers saying, okay, it's more wide open. We're not so classified to European or South American or Asian art. There's more of a wider broad. And I think people are really, really hungry for that.
Yeah, someone was talking about New York being the center of the art world. So I was like, what? We've got a war over that. And I was like, oh my God, I realized that I think of postmodernism as like the Revolutionary War. Like, no, we had postmodernism. We're never going back. But that it's really important to recognize the plurality of what's out there. And I'm so grateful these encyclopedia art museums are seeing the gaps and seeing what they're missing out on. Because I think Native art is some of the most creative and fascinating art out there. And it's also, for collectors, it tends to be undervalued. So it's extremely collectible. Correct. If you're a new emerging collector, and I do kind of consciously present, you could be collecting this or that. When it's extremely affordable. I wrote an article about, oh God help me, Cusco school painting. So that came out in the Andes in the 1600s, but people are still doing that style of painting today. So it's kind of Mannerist European style painting, dovetailed with indigenous iconography. So very, Roman Catholic gold, very luscious oil paintings. But you'll have, parrots, or you'll have, angels with parrot wings, or the Last Supper will have, I'll get the words wrong, but anyway, a guinea pig as the feet, But this, you can get an original oil painting from Peru for $40, which is totally undervalued.
Right.
But from the collector's viewpoint, it's amazing.
You'll pay $40 for shipment.
Yeah. You have a great original painting for $80.
Right.
Yeah.
So 10 years is quite joyous occasion to be in print publication. Yeah. Why print? What made you stay with print? And some people look at print as a old school form in this digital age. So what made you really be saying, okay, I'm going to do a print publication?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, I don't think we want, our, day-to-day financial news be sent to us in print. We need quick news digitally. But I think things that are more reflective, we really want to unplug from our computers. I live on my computer, so I definitely want to unplug. And what's doing well now in print are magazines, like niche magazines with a small community that really rely on beautifully printed images, because that 72 DPI, that only goes so far. And Well, it's art magazines that are doing well and thriving in print. And then also food and travel, things where you really want to get lost in the beautiful images of printmaking. But also,
I call that tuning out. You want to tune out. You want to sit there and you want to engage in a sense that you're just being brought in and reading and seeing the images. And
anymore, it feels like being online is work. So this is you would do more yourself. And so I'm Gen Z. I'm of that age, and even millennials will actually read more magazines than my generation did at their age. So there is this idea that print magazine is something more you do for yourself. And it's also you're engaging with this community. You're engaging with these voices. So, I think it feels more social, even though you're doing it by yourself.
Correct. Absolutely. You're connecting to it. And I like turning the page. I still read books. I still read the Wall Street Journal. I still, I like that essence of turning and just you're engulfed in it. I think more than like you said, sitting at your computer and seeing all these images. And it's like reading. It's like work. I want that tune out time.
And there are like 50 other tabs open.
Right. And dings happening and everything else.
Our magazine does not ding. Thank God.
So your readership is global. That's fantastic. Congrats to you on that. So have you seen a surgence of, be it Canada, South America, Europe? Where have you had more readership start really engaging in subscribing to your publication?
Well, it is definitely English-based, so that is a limitation, which I naively at the beginning when we were planning this out, we're like, oh, well, we'll translate. We'll have a Spanish language issue each time. I was like, okay, that's naive. That would be a great goal. We're not there yet, but it would be a good goal. But definitely the United States. And, we started in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Then I moved to Oklahoma in 2017. But as I said, because of a relationship with the Abbey Museum, the state that has the third largest subscribers is Maine. So, we really try to not be locked into one region. So we do have subscribers in all the United States and almost all of the Canadian provinces and territories. I need to get them all. But definitely North America focused. But I am so happy and overjoyed whenever I get, subscriptions come in from other countries, especially libraries, because then they'll be read and reread.
Right. Are there a lot of artists out there that are just blowing you over from North Dakota or California? I mean, just like, you're like, wow, where were these people? They're just, I guess, untapped communities, especially like North Dakota and South Dakota and Wyoming and more rural areas.
Yeah, and that's an interesting push-pull, with native art versus, and I shouldn't say versus because we're all, in it together. Right. But kind of the mainstream is this idea that, you go to art school and you get the MFA and you go to the mainstream, this major college, and then you end up in Paris or France, Paris or New York or Tokyo or Sydney, these major art centers. And that is true in the native art world, but there's also people have this commitment to their communities. So many really stellar artists are in extremely remote rural communities. So that's interesting that you do have to dig. So we have a system that kind of emerged organically, and it was from friends, colleagues like Kelly Church. She's Potawatomi, Adawa, Ojibwe, and she became our Great Lakes, our Northeastern Woodlands representative. So we have regional representatives. And they kind of advocate for their region. So Jackie Severe, who's Northern Arapaho, kind of represents the Northern Plains. And she'll get on my case and she will be like, well, we need more Northern Plains representation. Here, go look at this artist. Go look at that artist. So to have this system where people are actively advocating, I think is really important. It's a good reminder.
Is there one, I think, more area that's more untapped or underrepresented?
Oh my God. So I kind of fell into writing. Well, I always wrote, but I was doing the magazine because I was teaching early Native American art history at the Institute of American Arts. And when I taught, and I took many art history classes, but I don't have a degree. So I had to just kind of figure things out. So I was going Tierra del Fuego up to Northern Greenland, just like steamroller, and it was before 1950s. what was going on in the Amazon, 2,000 years ago that isn't culturally sensitive. We should probably revisit that topic. But so there were gaps. So all these areas, it was so difficult to find information about that. If anyone comes to me with an idea from the area, so kind of online, I became aware of the work of Frank Weaver, who was working with these, the Paitavatara tribe, and I'm sorry if I butcher the name, but they're in eastern Paraguay. So Paraguay, you don't hear a lot about. Eastern Paraguay, you really don't hear a lot about the Gran Chaco area. So when I saw what he was doing, I was like, oh my God, please, can we work together and write a feature article? So I am like, Greenland, the subarctic, we will I love math. We'll see these gaps and we like, oh, we need to fulfill these gaps. Or if we hear of an artist that's from a tribe you never hear from, then So Cherokees, there's so many of us, so it's kind of a special occasion, when we get to cover a Cherokee artist, because we could have entire magazines only devoted to us, or Navajo, So it's a balancing act. But if an artist is good and they're just doing something awesome, then we're going to cover them.
Fantastic. So you mentioned culturally sensitive art.
Yeah. And you were mentioning before about how elders don't always share. And it's like, that's a constant discussion too in Native art. And through education, I think tribal museums conveying this to more mainstream museums, that mainstream museums are getting the memo, but that not all information is for everyone. Archivists are really fighting for that too, that some information is only for people initiated into it. Some is only for tribal members. Some are only for people of certain genders, and that's just a given. And it's funny because there's this idea that in European Western cultures that, all information is freely available. And that's not true. And I always use the example of like a soda formula. Like, how do you make Coca-Cola? I can't access that information. It's not sacred, but it's proprietary information. So Western cultures definitely have this idea that information is, some of it is only for certain groups. So I do think the mainstream world's getting that memo. And I was concerned about Native artists who are kind of coming to their culture and learning about the culture from making art. So maybe they didn't have super informed elders, kind of telling them what's what. And I think we're all in a state of learning. Like none of us have it all figured out. Anyone who thinks they haven't figured out does not know. But they don't have this knowledge and they're not in community as much as, you'd like. So there's people that are really crossing barriers, really committing taboos by what they're portraying, using sacred images that maybe completely are not from their tribe or their region, and really like
going a little rogue.
And how do you gently explain that to people? Because you don't want to, slap a young artist down at all. You want to build them up. But so I did sponsor a talk where we had 5 really important leaders from very different tribes discussing sacred imagery. But I kind of want, and people think like this is impossible, but I kind of want to try to do it, is just list, do not do this. Well, the Grand Council of the Haudenosaunee in 1975, they came out and they published a list. They're like, no, do not portray an image of a false face mask. Do not portray an image of, this is for the public. If you're a practitioner, you're using in ceremony, different story. Do not portray a Cornhusk Society mask. So, I'm like, ooh, because if you put anything out there, people will be like, what? This is all wrong. But then you initiate that conversation. But like medicine bundles, contents of medicine bundles, no, just don't do it. If you're a spiritual leader for your tribe, then you can do things that other people can't. But if you're a young artist that's getting your information from books, like be cautious.
Right. You can't read everything, or you can't believe everything that you read.
Online, no.
Yeah.
I think you definitely need the humility to be corrected. So we do try to have an errata section where it's like, yep, we blew it. We made a mistake.
So do you have a collection of various writers that write specifically for the publication? Are they freelance, or do you have actually staff writers on the publication?
Oh, God. That'd be awesome to have staff writers. No. money is tight, but it's freelancers. And then, I I thought it was just in the native art world that people wear 20 different hats, but it is kind of the art world where it's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to write, I'll critique, I'll also be an artist, but I'll also work in a gallery, the fifth will also
Juggle.
And I think that's pretty common. And what's really, I mean, on one hand, that's rough because you're pulled in so many different directions. On the other hand, you have so many different perspectives. So I do think every artist out there should curate a show, even if it's just one show. So you know how nerve-wracking it is to handle other people's work.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I have kind of seen a trend, which, is a little hard, but I think ultimately it's good. And that you'll have a young scholar who will write for us. And I'll be so happy to have this young scholar write for us. But then they'll get this really prestigious job that soaks up all their time. So it's like, so I do see it as like, oh, we lose people, but that's in a good way because they're getting these awesome professional positions. So yeah, maybe we're transitory, but that's okay as long as that flow keeps happening.
Correct. So do you think, what is your message and what's your ultimate goal for the publication to the outside world, especially for the non-native reader?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the thing is, non-native people have appreciated native art for centuries now. Like I love Albrecht Dürer, where he's writing about like he saw this collection of materials from Mesoamerica, and he's like, these are the most beautiful things ever created. But I want the mainstream art world to be aware of native art, but I also want our perspectives and our values to come with the art. And I think a lot of curators and writers are seeing that, non-native writers are seeing that you don't just take the art piece, you also want, all the information around it. You want it to be within its context. And as best as possible to kind of understand what the creator, the person that was making it, was thinking and what their intentions were.
Well, you want to know about them. You want to know their DNA. You want to know their backstory. You want to know why it is that it is what it is. My great-grandmother was a bead maker, and
cool.
I got to talk to her before she passed. It's like, what drove you to be a bead maker? She said, just the use of what I saw in creating a form with my hands.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of unique. That makes a lot of sense. You have something that was instilled in you culturally, and you just felt the urge. And I think a lot of artists just feel the urge. Like you said, you don't have to go to school. They don't have to go to university. They don't have to go and do all the other things that mainstream artists sometimes do. It just happens because they feel it within, I guess.
Yeah. And I'm not telling people don't go to art school.
Right. Neither am I.
No. But it's like I hated art school. So I did the kind of the worst way, but also strangely the best way is I hated school. I hated art school. So I kept changing schools, which of course that's silly because then your credits don't come with you.
Right.
Well, I ended up going to 8 different art schools.
Wow.
Or 8 different schools. But if you want to learn a lot of different perspectives, ultimately that is the way to do it. So part of my goal, because we do have different audiences. We have the collectors as audiences. We have the artists as audiences. So that's always a fun challenge is like, how do you make the information accessible and interesting to these different audiences? But I do want to kind of break down what is the best of art school, this exchange of ideas, this reflection. And how do I get that out to the public? So I'm like, there are a lot of resources that you probably saw on our website, like defining art terms, for Native American issues, like what all these acronyms mean, So it's like, how do we take these ideas and make them available? Because a lot of collectors also don't have the luxury of having MFAs, but they're still passionate about the art. So they're absolutely part of the conversation. I always, kind of argue that things can happen in academia and that's great. But if the collectors and the artists aren't aware of it, then it's not really a conversation. So we're trying to break down these complex ideas and make them very accessible and be inclusionary.
Right.
I'm really happy that we've had writers from all sorts of backgrounds, including indigenous backgrounds not from the Americas. So we only cover art by indigenous peoples of the Americas, but we've had writers that are indigenous to other parts of the world, which I think is fantastic and brilliant.
The perspective, because we've gone through similarity, I think, backgrounds and changes, and I think there's a connected story that's probably being told. But they're just from another place of the world. They could be from Australia or so. So is your goal being met with the publication? Is that ever changing?
Yeah. That you accomplish one thing and that just makes you more excited for the next thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we're several writers and I are having kind of these sessions, and then my cousin, like this magazine totally runs on cousin power. All my subscribers are my cousins, which thank God I have a ton of cousins, and my mom and my sister helped out. They proofread early on, they copy edited, so definitely relations are important. Yeah, so the writers and I, we're kind of trying to look and reorganize and kind of refine, what we need to do, how can we do it better, and how can we grow. So kind of what are we going to do for the next decade?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Everything. Anything and everything.
No. Well, we have had symposia and this educational component. These discussions, I think, are so important and valuable. So it's like, okay, how do we grow that? And we've done Stacey Pratt, who's a Muskogee writer from Tulsa, who's really amazing. She and I were able to work with a Shingle Springs Rancheria in California.
Mm-hmm.
And we were able to do an online workshop where we helped, and it was very quick. I wish we could do more. It was several sessions where we work with these artists, these visual artists, to try to empower them to learn how to write about art. And I thought it was so cool that Shingle Springs saw that as a useful skill. And I'm like, oh, could we grow that? Could we have workshops, writing workshops?
Right.
It's like, that would be really exciting.
That would be fun. If you ever do that, let me know. I'd love to be part of that and take part of it in some way or form.
Yeah, writing's power. I mean, that's what Sequoia taught us. It's a tool. Let's use it.
Right. I want to go back to that because it's a very, I think, needed element because it's the educational component, which I'm very excited and try to promote is also the youth, given that a lot of Native American youth are not given the tools necessary to learn about art or their backgrounds. And so providing something like that, I think, would be phenomenal. Is that something that's part of your goal set to actually do that? Or is it something that you actually promote and try to seek outward?
Yeah. And it's kind of like I'm pulled into many directions. Like my great makers are real. My makers are real. But, it's what are the priorities? So we write, but not everyone reads. So how do we reach other people? And I'm kind of, when you say do everything, I'm kind of resistant to trying to get into video and film. But it does seem like that's kind of the lingua franca of our tribes.
And how so? And in what perspective?
What do you mean?
Well, if you want to get into video and film, into what avenue? Like actually do a movie or script writing, or you have stories that you want to...
No. That's for other people. Like if you want to get out and do education, that it seems like probably documentaries are probably a way, or even short educational videos, because there are people that just absolutely don't like reading.
Right.
It seems like that probably needs to happen. That's not something I passionately want to do. It just seems something necessary.
Right. Well, it's that digital age, and I think it's also for me personally, it's a disconnect. I'd rather see people, see them live, interact. But I think, for those sources that are people that are out there in the rural areas that they don't have the ability to go to a class somewhere that's very distant for them and then, travel an hour and a half back and engaging in that documentaries and other elements that kind of engage them and provide the source and resources for them.
Oh, personally, I love in-person talks. Yeah. And in Santa Fe, like every Sunday, what do? Sunday afternoon, you go to the museum and you go to a talk, or you go to the bookstore and there's artists panels, which I think are great. And moving to Oklahoma, I'm like, that is completely not here. A little bit, but not so much. So I'm like, so I've been able to do, personally small talks through the Cherokee Heritage Center or the Southeastern Indian Artists Association. And I like doing them one-on-one recorded, because then you can have real talk. You can talk about stuff that's okay for the community, Native people, but not okay for the general public. Like once I know something's recorded and going to be on YouTube, you're definitely going to get a different talk than you get in person.
Correct. That is true. So it's also that engagement.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Oh, people should go to real events with real people.
True. America, you're Cherokee. You're a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. What instilled in you at an early age to get involved and be such a promoter of your own culture?
Oh, my dad, 100%. So when we were kids, my parents, they dragged us to shows, they dragged us to museums. I remember we lived in Muskogee, and after church, we would go to the Five Trents Museum, and I'd use my little allowance to buy like itty bitty little cards. So, yeah, and I know other Native artists where their grandparents or the parents really instilled this importance of visual arts to them. And that's not the Oklahoma story at all. That's not most kids in Oklahoma. But I think it's interesting. My parents were involved with my dear friend and mentor, Dr. Mary Jo Watson, who's Seminole, and Benjamin Harjo, who's Absentee Shawnee and Seminole. But they were all part of this intertribal museum, the Center for the American Indian, that opened in 1978. So I was a little kid, but my folks, like Native families did, they put kids to work. So my sister and I, we had to sort through the mailing. So I was like, oh no, I started volunteering or being volunteered for Native arts when I was 6. Yeah. So I just kind of grew up around it. I kind of rebelled against it, but
and now you're continuing carrying the torch and promoting it.
Yeah. Yeah, and my dad, he was the kind of person you could call up and be like, "Hey, I got 3rd place in this dinky show in the middle of nowhere." They'd be like, "That's fantastic! That's so incredible!" So that you're like, "Oh, you're just saying that," but it does feel good to hear that. And I have had artists sometimes with artists, they'll be like, "Well, why did you get that?" Well, I put in for that. So. I thought after my dad passed on that I'm going to take it on myself. It was so great for him to be such a cheerleader that I'm going to be a cheerleader for Native arts. And one of my dearest friends is she's Linala Mahatawa, who's Hopi and Chukka. And if you're Hopi, you absolutely do not, you do not put yourself in front. You don't promote yourself. You don't make yourself more important than the rest of the community. So I was like, okay, well, how did Native artists do it? Because it's just really, if you are integrated with the community, you can't do a lot of things that are expected of Western artists.
Correct.
Where it's like, here's my resume. Look at me. I'm so important. Right. I'm trying out for this. I'm trying out for that. So I figured that we can be a vehicle where we can root for people. We can shout about like, hey, they got this award. They did this. They did this great project. And that way and that brings me to another thread about the artists that we profile, and really we try to cover everyone, whether we like them or not, doesn't matter. We try to cover everyone, but with the artists we profile specifically, it's really important to me that they have a close connection to their community. Because you can be a Native artist and never come home, and never.
True.
If you're too cool for your tribe, I got some questions about you.
Right.
But that tends to be the people that get most famous and most applauded by the mainstream, the outside.
Correct.
So I hope that we can be kind of a counterbalance of like, well, what is their connection to their community?
So being the writer or being the editor per se of the publication, what drives you? What excites you to being the writer?
Oh my God. Well, yeah, like you mentioned before, telling those stories that you don't hear enough about. And I do find I love editing. Like I'm like, yes, I will edit. Give me something and I'll edit it. And sometimes that really annoys people because they're like, I just wanted you to read it. I didn't want feedback. And it's like, well, then why didn't you get to me? But I do find that editing brain is a totally different brain than the writing brain. So I found it more and more and more difficult to write. I'll just say that. But I found that I also do side projects, side gigs, to fund the magazine. So I would guest edit publications about Santa Fe Indian Market and Native Art Week in Santa Fe. And I noticed the last few directors there have really kind of promoted artists from outside the area, but it is Santa Fe Indian Art Week, and it's run by the Southwestern Association of Indian Artists. So I thought it was really important to kind of, ironically, to point the finger back to Southwestern communities. So I've really tried to take it on myself, and I'm no expert on any of these communities, but to write articles about, Hopi basketry, about Zuni fetish carving. And I think, again, it's really important to kind of promote indigenous art forms that often outsiders and sometimes even Native artists doesn't have that seal of approval that this is art, this is official art. So sometimes people will see it as decorative and they won't see it in all its complexity or see it as an art form. So I really tried that. And I don't know how well I succeeded, but I did write one article about Zuni fetishes, or people say figurative carving because it's not a religious fetish.
Correct.
But, and just trying to demonstrate that I already interviewed 3 practitioners that have very, very, very different approaches, and that here's this art form, and it's a legitimate art form that has different styles within it and different movements within it. And I think it's so important to kind of hold the outsider, the reader's hand, and help them look and see something that, maybe they've seen this art 100 times before, but maybe they didn't notice this one thing, or you give them one clue about, kind of the thinking behind the making,
Right.
and then they can see it with fresh eyes.
Do you think that there's a lot of educational behind the writing in the magazine in telling the non-native not everything is Southwestern driven?
Yeah, so we really, it's kind of sad. Our early competitors they don't exist anymore.
Oh, wow.
So we only have one main competitor that kind of is in the same field. But everything else was really Southwest focused. So ironically, when we're based in Santa Fe, we're like, okay, we're from Santa Fe, we're not of Santa Fe. So it's very important to cover, everyone from everywhere. But
Right.
now I think it's really important, like I said, to include the Southwest in that and kind of look, dig deeper. Because I think people think they know about a lot of Southwestern art, but do they really know about it?
True.
But yeah, of course, growing up in Oklahoma and the art scene here, you always see art, but, maybe the outside art world doesn't really study our art as much. And here we have so many different tribes from so many different areas. So, coast to coast, that there's Modoc tribes here, that there's, Seneca Cayuga tribes. So it's kind of a luxury growing up here. So you can see all the gaps and how complex
The variances. Yeah.
Yeah. And I always think that Oklahoma just, there's many ways that our worlds can exist. And for the most part in Oklahoma, it is the Native people that have been the audience and have been the collectors of Native art here.
Mhm.
And this idea of appealing to tourists, that's not the only model for our art scene or art market. It doesn't have to be outsiders. It doesn't have to be tourists. So there is really wonderful cultural tourism. And I have to give Cherokee Nation cultural tourism is awesome. Like they're amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm totally floored by what they do. But yeah, tourism's not the only way to promote art or art scene.
I think it's telling our story. I think the cultural centers are really doing a fantastic job nationally in telling their story and how we've continued as a peoples, a tribe, the various nations, and we're more than just what the outsider looks upon. We do have relative items or graphics and stories and that are collectively similar, but we're all different. There's a diversity. There's an immense amount of various tribes nationally that need to tell their story. We're not just American Indians, as the outside world sees us at times, unfortunately, thanks to Hollywood.
Yeah. Like I think what's definitely changing, that is changing right before our eyes. It's really exciting.
What other changes have you seen in the last 10 years?
Oh my God. Everything. Things are happening so quickly. Like it's funny to think about, but 10 years ago, I can just see 1-2 punch. Like Native fashion's always been with us. Louis Kivannu was really important. Obviously, we wore clothes.
You're right.
Louis Kivannu was so important in Native fashion, and there were so many people. There was Whitney Polga and the Native Fashion Club, and so all these amazing things. But Jessica Mecca, Turtle Mountain Chippewa from North Dakota, she got her PhD, and she really, through Beyond Buckskin, she promoted Native fashion, but also recuperating this history of Native fashion and how much has been done before. Then Karen Kramer curated a show with a catalog, Native Fashion Now, and that went to New York, NMAI. So that's really important. I think it went to NMAI. I hope I'm not wrong. But and then boom, now Native fashion is this massive thing. People are completely aware of it. That's why the Native art world, things happen so quickly.
So quickly, right?
It's really gratifying. But I really honestly think it's like boom, boom, boom. We have the writing, we have the books. Now it's like everywhere.
We're here to stay.
People are very aware of it. And I'm obviously not much of a fashionista, but I think it's exciting because mainstream people, that's a way that they can know about Native art, and buy clothes made by Native people. It's very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think it's a good educational tool as well, because people learn a little bit more about the distinct cultures and the heritage aspects and why something is the way it is, the connection that we have to our past, and now they're understanding why this emblem or graphic or icon is on this dress or this top, and why it's used the way it is.
Yeah, it's a great spark for conversation. But then I also see like Native photography, like I think it was 2006 or 2003, Kalea Senegini and Veronica Pastelora from UC Davis, that they published a book about, and it was a survey, an art show about, and then they had a symposium about Native photography. So they kind of, and theirs was Indigenous global indigeneity, but they kind of produced that book, and then boom, now there's so many major traveling exhibitions about Native photography. One's at the Amon Carter right now in Texas. The Minneapolis Institute of Art is planning this major survey of Native photography with a catalog. So boom, now there's books, there's resources. It's not something you have to scrounge through, and in your library alone to get the one book about. And same with Native American printmaking. Like just boom, like now documenting these histories is happening so much.
Correct.
But we kind of take it for granted, like it's always been there, but this is a really development.
It's our time. We're here. We're the it factor.
Yeah. Although I always want to give credit to every generation of people that did things before. There's a prominent Native museum leader who says, "Oh, Native people, weren't really curating." I'm like, who the heck was curating all these Native shows in Oklahoma for the 20th century?
Right. It just didn't
Native
happen.
People.
Fell out of the sky and just happened.
If a Native person curates a show, there is a book about it. Didn't happen. So I think we always have to give credit to all the generations of people that brought us to the point we're at now. But yeah, things are happening. And I think Indigenous representation of Afro-Indigenous communities is now happening at a greater clip. People are much more aware. And one of our readers and advisors, Anya Montiel, was able to just create a visual, online virtual show of six Afro-Indigenous women artists. So that is recent and fantastic. And then
sounds amazing.
Inclusion of non-binary people. And this is exciting that you see this even in mainstream art museums, inclusion of non-binary and intergender Native artists. And again, how, nothing's new that we're building on our ancestors. The Wheelwright Museum of the American Indian was co-founded, obviously, by Mary Wheelwright, but also Hosteen Clark, who was an intersex Navajo spiritual leader. So here's an art museum founded by a spiritual leader who is non-binary. So that's really kind of exciting.
Education, learning, I think that's the key factor, is just opening the door and keep opening many, many doors as we continue on and expanding, letting the outside world know who we are and what we are, and we're here to stay. We're not just the Native American art scene, so to speak, of what they think it is. There's so much more depth to it. And I think there's a learning process that has to occur, and just appreciation. As any art form, it's all about interpretation, what the viewer sees. But I think it's also the emergence and the morphing of the various Native American artists and what they're bringing to the Native American art world, be it a painter, be it a sculptor, be it pottery, be it beading and basket weaving, and so much more. There's so much more than people really understand. It's not just about the paint or the pot that you see at the roadside stand. Even though that can be really fantastic. Yeah, true. I've seen a few things I've picked up throughout the years.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So in reclaiming the archive, through all the research that's now available, so many communities and individual artists are able to just look at images online, and it's so much better when they can visit the actual pieces and reclaim art forms that, had kind of gone to sleep and died out. So that's exciting. And I can't even keep up with how many small communities are doing things, but there's a great movement towards reclaiming pre-contact textiles and textile dyes, and that's kind of happening all over. And then different different utilitarian art forums. And some of these I didn't even know about until a writer or an artist will come and bring this up. But even shell
Fantastic.
carving now is like huge. Like I can't count how many shell carvers there are.
And you have a beautiful piece on today.
Yeah.
And where's that artist from?
Oh, Antonio Grant. He's from Qualla Boundary in North Carolina. So
Okay.
Eastern Bend, Cherokee.
Oh, America,
It's
what is the best way for our listeners to become readers?
Yes, thank you. So I try to make it simple that I know I can always streamline it more, but our website is firstamericanartmagazine.com. And you can always subscribe online. If you don't like to do that, and some people don't, they can print out a form. Honestly, you could look up our address and mail us a check with your address. And then for people that want digital, there is digital. That's through Jumag, but just go to our website and and you can take it from there from our subscription page. And then we are carried by major stores. So Barnes and Noble, you can go to most Barnes and Nobles, and in Canada, you can go to Chapters Indigo, and we're carried by them. And then a number of independent bookstores also carry us. So
Fantastic.
yeah, we always have the little insert, when you're flying and all the inserts go flying.
I'm a fan.
We have those.
I'm definitely a fan of your publication.
Make-
You're quarterly, correct?
Yeah, and some people, I would die if it was any more. But some people also said, I love it when collectors and subscribers will be like, "Yes, we read your magazine cover to cover." I love hearing that, and I hear it a lot. But people have also said, "Don't come out more often."
Oh, right.
Like it kind of takes us a period of time to really digest everything completely. Because it is meaty. It's not fluffy.
No, but I think it's. I'm definitely a fan, and I go back and I dog ear things, and I go back and read it a second and third time sometimes because I just find it so fascinating and such interesting perspective and artists and people out there that I don't know about, and I just find it amazing that there's such an influx of artists, Native American artists that are out there, and they're bringing so much to their continued culture and communities.
Yeah. And it's interesting because now, with Instagram, you think, oh, well, do you need this? Because you could just follow the artist on Instagram. You're like, oh,
quick and easy.
So quickly you get overwhelmed. Like the native art world is small, but it's also really big too.
Right.
So it's that's almost the service we supply is kind of making sense of all these currents. And there's so much that, okay, well, can we pinpoint this? Can we pinpoint that?
There's such an overload, but it's good. It's good that it's happening, that there's so much influx and so much variety and diversity of artists out there that you can actually capture. And congrats. Yeah. Congrats on 10 years. That's amazing.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for joining us on Beyond the Art. And congrats to you again at 10 years. Hopefully we can do 10 years.
Yeah. Or maybe you'll be making films. But I'm really excited by you listed so many interesting artists and arts advocates that I look forward to seeing who you're uplifting and promoting too.
Fantastic.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely.